My name is Ashley, and today I turned 30. I used to think a milestone like that meant something, that by now I'd finally be seen, valued, maybe even loved, without having to earn it. That morning, my father called and told me he had a special gift planned for my birthday, something unforgettable. He sounded almost proud. My mother told me to dress nicely, because the whole family wanted this year to be different. I held on to that word all day, like it meant redemption. By the time I walked into the private room they had booked at the Grand Reserve, 15 relatives were already there, smiling too hard, watching too closely. I remember thinking maybe this was the year everything changed. Maybe this was the year they stopped treating me like the family disappointment and started treating me like a daughter. Then my father, a prominent businessman in our small New England town, stood, took the microphone, and cleared his throat like he was about to make a toast. Instead, he looked straight at me and said, "As of this moment, I'm officially cutting ties with this useless daughter." The room froze. My mother, a perfectly coiffed socialite, folded her arms and said it was embarrassing to have a child like me. My brother, Brandon, a slick finance guy, laughed and added that before I disappeared, I should pay our parents back $200,000 for raising me. No one stopped them. No one said my name. I could feel every stare, every whisper, every quiet judgment landing on me all at once. I walked out before they could see me break. 3 days later, they wouldn't stop calling. I still hadn't realized that the birthday humiliation was only the beginning. I didn't go home that night and cry into a pillow the way people expect women like me to do in stories like this. I drove for almost 2 hours through the familiar streets of Massachusetts, my phone face down on the passenger seat, and my jaw locked so hard it hurt. Humiliation burns first, then hardens. By the time I pulled into my apartment garage in Boston, I wasn't shaking anymore. I was cold. My phone showed 3 missed calls and a wall of messages from relatives who suddenly felt entitled to check on me after standing there and doing nothing. A few said my parents had gone too far. A few asked what I had done to provoke it. One aunt wrote that maybe public shame was necessary because some daughters don't change until they hit rock bottom. I blocked her first, then I blocked 6 more. I stood in my kitchen in my birthday dress and replayed every second of that room. My father hadn't sounded impulsive, he had sounded prepared. My mother hadn't looked drunk or emotional, she had looked satisfied. My brother hadn't snapped in the heat of the moment. He had delivered that number, $200,000, like he'd rehearsed it. That was what bothered me first. Not the cruelty. The precision. Around midnight, my best friend, Sarah, showed up without asking, carrying takeout from our favorite Italian spot and that look people wear when they're trying not to pity you. I let her in because she was the only person I trusted not to ask whether I was okay. She took one look at me and said, "Tell me exactly what they think they're hiding." I told her everything. When I repeated the part about paying them back for raising me, she stopped eating and looked at me carefully. "Ashley, that wasn't random. They were setting up a story. Publicly." She was right. A family that humiliates you in front of witnesses is building a defense. They wanted an audience because they wanted a narrative. Useless daughter, burden, ungrateful child, owes us money. They weren't just attacking me, they were preparing people to believe whatever came next. Sarah asked who would benefit if everyone thought I deserved to be cut off. The question rearranged years of memories in seconds. My college fund that vanished after my grandfather died. Paperwork my father once signed, for convenience. My mother's obsession with keeping things inside the family. My brother always knowing numbers he shouldn't know. I went into my bedroom and pulled an old storage box from the back of the closet, the one I hadn't opened in years, because it held documents from the period of my life when I still confused control with love. Tax forms, scholarship letters, insurance notices. Then I found a faded envelope from my grandmother's lawyer. Inside was a letter confirming that a trust had been set aside in my name, with staged access at 25 and full transfer at 30. 30. Today. My special gift. Sarah read it twice, then asked how much had been in the trust. I whispered the number. It was a lot more than $200,000. Enough to change a life. Enough to save a failing business. Enough to explain why my family had turned my birthday into a public execution. At 2:13 a.m., my mother texted, "Can we talk? There are things you need to understand." I stared at the message for a long time, then I typed back one word. "Tomorrow." Not because I wanted reconciliation, because if they had stolen from me, I wanted to see how desperate they were before they realized I knew. I refused to meet them in some neutral cafe where they could rewrite history over coffee. I told my mother to meet me at the house I grew up in, a grand old colonial in a historic Massachusetts town, the same house where control was always dressed up as love. She agreed immediately. That alone told me they were scared. I arrived early, parked 2 houses down, and saw my father pacing through the half-open curtains while my mother kept checking her phone. Before I went in, I clipped a recorder inside my coat and opened the voice memo app on my phone. If they lied, I wanted proof. If they slipped, I wanted that too. The second I walked in, my mother rushed toward me, already crying, already performing remorse. I stepped back. My father stood near the dining room, a room that had witnessed countless family dinners and tense holiday gatherings, wearing that tired, burdened expression he always used when he wanted to make his failures look noble. I didn't sit. I told them to skip the apology and tell me the truth. My mother started with the expected excuses. Things got out of hand. Emotions were high. I had too much to drink. My father said they'd made a terrible mistake. I cut through it. You didn't ambush me in front of 15 relatives by accident, I said. You chose the room, the audience, the microphone, and my brother quoted a number. So try again. My father's face changed first. Not shame. Irritation. My mother sat down and said they were trying to force a wake-up call. I nearly laughed. A wake-up call? By calling me useless in public? My father said I had no idea how much pressure they were under. I told him to start with my trust. The silence that followed was real. My mother looked at my father. My father looked at me. Then he asked, "What trust?" Even then he chose insult over honesty. I told him I meant the trust my grandmother left me, the one scheduled for transfer at 30. My mother started crying for real then, not because I was hurt, but because the lie was collapsing. My father finally admitted they had been in financial trouble for years. His business, a regional real estate firm, had taken losses, loans piled up, debts rolled over, and when the company got close to collapse, they used money earmarked for family stability. I asked if that was what he called stealing from his daughter. My mother said they intended to replace it. I asked, before when? Before I found out? Or before they publicly cut me off so no one would believe me afterward? That was when my father said the quiet part out loud. He admitted they needed people to understand why I wouldn't be getting anything from them. If word got out that I was attacking the family over money, they wanted everyone ready to believe I was the problem. It wasn't a breakdown. It was preemptive character assassination. They had poisoned the room before I even knew what they were hiding. Then my father muttered that they were trying to protect the family name. I told him he meant his name. He didn't deny it. Instead, he said something I will never forget. Better one daughter feels hurt than the whole family gets dragged through the mud. That was the truth. Stripped clean. They had sacrificed me to protect themselves. I asked one final question. Did you use my money with my consent? My mother shook her head before she caught herself. I saw it. So did he. What did you sign in my name? I asked. My father stood and said the conversation was over. I pulled out my phone and said, "No, it's just beginning." The room changed the second they saw my phone in my hand. Fear is ugly on people who have spent their whole lives relying on intimidation. My father looked less like a patriarch and more like a man calculating whether rage could still rescue him. My mother stopped crying and started watching me with naked panic. "You're recording us?" she asked. "I'm protecting myself," I said. "Something you should have taught me years ago." My father demanded I turn it off. I didn't. I asked him again. Slower now. Each word deliberate. "What did you sign in my name?" He tried the old tactic first, authority. He said I was being dramatic, disrespectful, unstable. I had heard every version of that script since I was a child. Then he tried shame. He reminded me of the roof over my head, the tuition they helped with, the years they had sacrificed to give me opportunities. But I had spent the night with paperwork, and paperwork is harder to manipulate than memory. "You're reciting emotional invoices," I said. "I'm asking about fraud." That word hit exactly where I wanted. My mother inhaled sharply. My father's jaw tightened. He walked to the window, then back to the table, then finally looked at me with the exhausted contempt of a man who resents being forced to admit what he's done. There were authorization forms, he said, for the trust restructuring. Signed by whom? I asked. He didn't answer. Signed by whom? I repeated. You were out of town, my mother blurted, then covered her mouth as if she could stuff the truth back inside. I turned to her. So you did sign something. She started crying again. It wasn't like that. Then tell me what it was like. My father snapped before she could answer. He said my grandmother's lawyer told them access could be arranged through family trustees under certain circumstances. They had obligations. They needed time. They needed liquidity. You forged my signature, I said. He didn't correct me. You used my inheritance to save your failing business. He still didn't correct me. And when the money wasn't coming back fast enough, you decided to humiliate me publicly before I found out. My father slammed his hand on the dining table. Enough. I stared at him. No. Enough was 30 years of being told loyalty only worked one direction. Enough was being raised like an accessory to your reputation. Enough was walking into my own birthday and realizing my family had turned it into a legal strategy. My mother kept saying my name. Ashley, Ashley. Softer and softer, as if tenderness could do the work truth refused to do. Then came the twist I hadn't expected. She whispered. Brandon told us this would happen. I went still. My brother hadn't just joined the humiliation, he had helped to design the timing. She admitted he warned them that if they didn't control the story before I turned 30, I would go through the documents and never stop asking questions. Suddenly, every smug look, every financial joke, every strange moment of overconfidence from him over the last few years fell into place. He knew. He had known for a long time. I asked how involved he was. My father immediately said, "Leave your brother out of this." That answer told me enough. Guilty people protect the person who can expose the rest. I asked whether he had benefited. My mother lowered her eyes. My father eventually admitted they had helped Brandon with certain expenses. Using whose money? Mine. Some of it had come from the trust. There it was. Not just theft. Distribution. My money had not only rescued my father's business, it had cushioned my brother too. The same brother who called me useless in public and demanded I pay them back. My father tried one last justification. They had always intended to make things right. I asked how. By replacing the money before I found out? Or by insulting me into silence? He had no answer. That was when I understood something important. Revenge isn't rage. Rage is fast. Revenge is patient. In that dining room, with the old family portraits staring down at us like witnesses who had chosen sides, I stopped wanting apologies. I wanted leverage. I looked at both of them and said, "You're going to give me every document connected to the trust, every business transfer, every account entry, every communication involving my name, and you're going to do it before I ask a lawyer to do it for me." My mother started begging instantly. She said they could fix this privately. She said court would ruin everyone. She said I didn't understand what public scandal would do to the family. I finally gave her the most honest answer I had ever spoken in that house. "That's exactly why you chose my birthday," I said, "because scandal is the only thing you've ever feared more than losing me." I told them they had 24 hours. Not to apologize. To produce evidence. If they hid anything, erased anything, moved anything, or warned Brandon before I spoke to him, I would assume the worst and act accordingly. My father asked whether I was threatening him. "No," I said. "I'm introducing you to the version of me you created." Then I turned and walked out. My phone was already buzzing before I reached my car. I didn't answer any of them. I sat behind the wheel, listened to the recording from start to finish, and realized for the first time that I was no longer trapped inside their version of reality. They were trapped inside mine now. Brandon called 17 times that night. I let every call go to voicemail. By the 6th message, he had switched from anger to urgency. By the 12th, he sounded scared. By the 17th, he sounded like a man trying very hard not to say something incriminating over the phone. That told me I had exactly one move available. Don't confront the guilty person while they still think performance can save them. Let them talk themselves into a worse position first. The next morning, a folder appeared in my email from an address my father used only for important family business. No subject line, no explanation. Just scanned documents, account summaries, transfer authorizations, and several pages so poorly redacted they might as well have been confessions. I spent hours going through everything line by line, then building a timeline. My trust had been touched years earlier, under the guise of temporary restructuring. A signature matching mine appeared on forms I had never seen. Funds were moved in stages into entities linked to my father's business. Later, withdrawals covered personal debt, tax liabilities, and family support disbursements to Brandon a new car, rent coverage, a credit card settlement, even a failed business venture in Silicon Valley. So when he told me to pay mom and dad back $200,000 for raising me, he had already burned through money that was legally mine. By afternoon, I had enough to know I wasn't imagining anything, but not enough to understand who had drafted the forged forms. So I called the law office listed in my grandmother's paperwork, a reputable Boston firm, and asked for a records appointment. The senior attorney had retired, but one partner remembered the trust. He couldn't discuss everything over the phone, yet his pause after I mentioned authorization forms signed while I was out of state told me more than he meant to. When I arrived, he brought out archived correspondence and let me review copies in silence. That was where the final pieces dropped into place. The firm had sent my father a notice years ago, denying one requested transfer without direct beneficiary confirmation. Weeks later, they received what appeared to be a signed consent document from me, witnessed by a notary whose stamp had since been invalidated. I felt my heart beat slow in the strange way it does when pain becomes clarity. This wasn't desperation blurred by bad choices. It was planned deception. Paperwork built layer by layer to convert theft into administration. And if they were willing to forge my signature once, then the birthday wasn't the origin of their cruelty. It was maintenance. I stepped out of the law office with copies, notes, and the kind of calm that only comes when grief is finally replaced by direction. Brandon texted while I was in the parking lot. "Can we talk?" "Alone." I replied 15 minutes later. "Tonight." "Same place you chose to humiliate me," he answered immediately. "Good. Let him think he still knew the terrain." I met him at the private room of the Grand Reserve, the same venue where my birthday had been destroyed, except this time it was empty and bright and stripped of witnesses. He walked in with the restless posture of a man prepared to charm, bully, or confess, depending on what gave him the best odds. He opened with the performance I expected. He said he was under pressure. He said our parents dragged him into something he didn't fully understand. He said the party got out of hand. I let him talk until he started repeating family phrases. "For your own good, you don't see the full picture." Everyone was under stress. Then I laid the copied disbursement records on the table between us. His face changed instantly. "There is no better lie detector than paperwork." "How much of my money did you spend?" I asked. He didn't answer. "Car first, then rent, then debt." He sat down slowly. "Ashley, listen." "No. You listen." My voice stayed calm. That shook him more than yelling would have. "You stood there and called me a burden while spending money that was never yours. You talked about repayment in front of 15 people while our parents used my inheritance to clean up your mistakes. So I'm going to ask once, and you're going to decide whether this night helps you or destroys you. How involved were you?" He rubbed both hands over his face and stared at the table. Then the truth started leaking out in pieces. He knew the trust existed. He found out when my father borrowed against business assets and panicked. He suggested moving first and explaining later. He told them that if I ever got full access at 30, I'd look into the numbers. He also suggested that if the family publicly framed me as unstable, selfish, and ungrateful, then any later legal challenge from me would look like revenge from a bitter daughter, instead of what it really was, a fraud victim fighting back. I should say I felt betrayed in that moment. But betrayal implies some remnant of innocence. What I felt was confirmation. He had not lashed out. He had strategized. He said they were trying to buy time. "With my life," I said. "With my name. With my birthday. With my dignity." He whispered that he was sorry. I believed he meant he was sorry now. Sorry I knew. Sorry there were documents. Sorry the daughter he had spent years underestimating had finally learned to read the entire chessboard. That night, I did something he mistook for mercy. I told him there might still be a path out if he cooperated fully. Every message, every email, every conversation, every bank transfer he had access to, every text where our parents discussed me, the trust, the party, or the timing. He asked whether I was trying to turn him against them. No, I said. I'm asking whether you want to go down with them. He sent the first batch before midnight. Screenshots. Forwarded threads. Fragments of family group messages. Voice notes from my mother. And one devastating text from my father, written 2 weeks before my birthday. Once she's publicly discredited, she'll be too busy defending herself to ask where the money went. I read that sentence 3 times, then I saved everything in 3 separate places. At 1:07 a.m. I opened a blank document and started building the case that would end the family myth I had been forced to live inside. For the next 48 hours, I disappeared on purpose. Not because I was hiding, but because silence is oxygen deprivation for manipulative people. My mother left sobbing voicemails. My father alternated between legal-sounding threats and wounded appeals about family resolution. Brandon sent messages every few hours asking what I planned to do, then deleting them too late to matter because I had already screenshotted everything. I didn't answer any of them. I spent those 2 days with Sarah, a contract attorney she trusted, and a forensic accountant who owed her a favor. By then, the facts had hardened into something undeniable. My inheritance had been improperly accessed. My signature had likely been forged. The transfers were not isolated emergencies, but a chain of choices spanning years. And the birthday spectacle had not only been emotional abuse, it looked increasingly like a coordinated reputational strike designed to neutralize me before discovery. Once that became clear, the question was no longer whether I could expose them. It was how to do it in a way that made escape impossible. People like my parents survive private confrontation. They crumble under synchronized truth. So I built layers. First, I wrote a formal demand letter through counsel, requiring preservation of documents and immediate accounting. Second, I prepared a statement for family distribution. Not emotional, not dramatic, just precise. Dates, transfers, names, recordings. Third, I assembled the social proof they had tried to weaponize against me. I wasn't going to rant online like an injured daughter. I was going to show people exactly how a family stages a public humiliation to protect financial theft. Before I sent anything, I listened to every recording again. My father saying, "Better one daughter feels hurt than the whole family gets dragged through the mud." My mother admitting Brandon warned them I'd investigate. Brandon confessing they wanted to discredit me before I found the money trail. No screaming, no ambiguity, just cold, usable truth. The morning I moved, I did it quietly. I terminated my lease in Boston, transferred essential accounts, redirected mail to a private box, and checked into a short-term furnished place in a different state under Sarah's name. By then, I trusted no one carrying my last name. At noon, my father showed up at my old apartment building and found nothing but an emptied unit and a front desk clerk with instructions not to share forwarding details. That was when his messages changed. Not anger anymore. Panic. He wrote that I was overreacting. That lawyers would only make things worse. That once these things entered the public sphere, everyone loses. That line almost made me smile. People who say that usually mean I might finally lose too. At 3 p.m., my attorney sent the notice to my parents and Brandon. At 3:07, I sent my family statement to every relative who attended the birthday, plus 3 who hadn't but had already inserted themselves into the story. I attached supporting excerpts, not every file, just enough to make denial stupid. I wrote that I had remained silent publicly out of respect for the family, until I discovered that birthday event had been orchestrated to damage my credibility before I learned of serious financial misconduct involving my inheritance. I stated that I would pursue all available remedies. I asked that no one contact me to pressure reconciliation without first reviewing the documentation. Then I attached 4 things: the trust letter showing scheduled transfer at 30, a transfer record tied to my father's company, a screenshot of my father's publicly discredited text, and a transcript excerpt from the recording in the dining room. 10 minutes later, the calls began. First from an aunt who had watched me get humiliated and now wanted to say she always knew something felt off. Then from an uncle suddenly furious, not at my pain, but at the fact that he had been used as part of a lie. Then from a cousin asking whether the forged signature issue meant criminal exposure. People become very interested in ethics when consequences acquire vocabulary. I let my attorney answer the serious ones. I let the rest ring. By evening, the family group chat had imploded. Screenshots came to me from 3 directions at once, my mother begging everyone not to judge before all the facts were known, my father calling the matter private and accusing me of vindictiveness, Brandon insisting he had only tried to keep the family together. Then one older relative, my grandmother's sister, typed a line that seemed to crack whatever was left of their collective delusion: you didn't keep the family together. You fed one child to protect the others. After that, the silence around them changed. It was no longer strategic. It was social exile forming in real time. But I wasn't done. The next morning, after my legal team filed the first formal complaint package, I posted a short public statement on my own account. Not names. Not accusations beyond what documentation supported. Just this. On my 30th birthday, I was publicly humiliated by family members who, I later discovered, had spent years misusing assets left to me by my grandmother. For those who witnessed that event and wondered why I walked out in silence, silence was the beginning, not the end. I will not be discussing this emotionally. I will be handling it accurately. That post did what fury never could. It stripped them of the ability to call me hysterical. It framed me as factual, controlled, dangerous, in the exact way liars hate most. Within hours, people from my father's business circle began distancing themselves. 2 advisory board members requested internal review of financial irregularities. A community charity my mother chaired quietly removed her from an upcoming event. Brandon's girlfriend, who apparently had never been told where his support money had come from, left their shared apartment before sunset. I didn't celebrate. Revenge isn't joy. It's balance restored through cost. That night my mother called from an unrecognized number, and against my better judgment, I answered. She was crying so hard I could barely understand her. She said she had made mistakes, but I didn't understand how afraid they had all been. She said exposure would ruin my father. It would break Brandon. It might destroy the family permanently. I let her speak until she ran out of breath. Then I said the only thing she truly needed to hear. You destroyed the family the moment you decided my life was the easiest price to pay. She whispered, "Please come home, sweetheart." I hung up. 5 minutes later, my father texted, "We can settle this." Right after that, Brandon sent exactly what I had been waiting for. "Where the hell are you?" Not because he missed me, because men like him only start shouting when they realize the target has moved out of range. The first hearing date was set faster than my father expected and slower than I wanted, which is how justice usually works. Late enough to test your patience, early enough to terrify the guilty. By then, every relationship in my family had started collapsing under the weight of truth. My father's company opened an internal review and suspended his authority over several accounts pending investigation. My mother stopped appearing at church, at charity lunches, at neighborhood events where reputation used to be her favorite outfit. Brandon tried to salvage sympathy by telling people he had been manipulated too, but that story died the moment his text messages surfaced showing he had suggested discrediting me before I turned 30. Public humiliation has a smell when it comes back around. Metallic, immediate, familiar. I recognized it because they had once tried to drown me in it. Now it was living in their house instead. During discovery, more documents surfaced than I had hoped for. There were handwritten notes from my father mapping cash flow gaps against trust access dates. Emails from my mother complaining that I was too sentimental to survive the truth. A message from Brandon mocking me for still believing Grandma had left me something meaningful. Every file stripped another excuse away. There would be no healing ending. No soft focus reunion. No family dinner where everyone cried and learned to communicate better. That version of this story died at my birthday party with the microphone in my father's hand. The version that survived belonged to me. People sometimes ask when I stopped loving them, but that's the wrong question. Love was never the engine here. Survival was. I didn't stop loving them in one dramatic second. I stopped prioritizing their comfort over my reality. And to people like them, that feels exactly like betrayal. The settlement offer came first, of course. It always does when arrogant people finally meet paperwork. My father proposed partial repayment over time if I dropped all formal actions and signed a confidentiality agreement. My mother sent a separate handwritten letter begging me not to make private pain permanent. Brandon, astonishingly, asked whether I would at least agree not to release any more messages because his career was taking a hit. I read all three and felt nothing but distance. A year earlier, even 6 months earlier, I might have mistaken their fear for remorse. Not anymore. Remorse centers the injured. Fear centers the self. They were not devastated by what they had done. They were devastated that the daughter they had trained to absorb damage had chosen to return it with evidence. We rejected the initial offer. Then the second. Then the third, which finally included near full financial restoration, admission of unauthorized transfers without full criminal confession, and liquidation of 2 major assets to cover damages. My attorney asked what outcome I actually wanted. The answer surprised even me with how simple it sounded when spoken aloud. I want the truth to cost them more than the lie ever paid. In the end, that is exactly what happened. My father lost operational control of the business he had gutted my inheritance to save, and when community whispers turned into formal scrutiny, the man who once believed reputation could protect him discovered how quickly reputations abandoned the exposed. My mother, who had spent decades managing appearances like a religion, became a woman people spoke around instead of to. Brandon, who thought clever cruelty made him powerful, learned the difference between being the favored child and being the expendable witness once legal pressure began. He called me one final time, voice cracked, asking whether I was really going to let everything burn. I answered him calmly, "No, I'm just refusing to stand in the fire you built for me." After the settlement, I changed more than my address. I changed banks, routines, habits, numbers, locks, passwords, and the reflex that once made me explain myself to people who had no right to demand it. I took the recovered funds and did something none of them expected. I didn't spend them trying to look successful. I used them to become free. I launched the design consultancy I had postponed for years because my family always called my goals unrealistic unless they could benefit from them. I rented a bright studio apartment with too many windows in a trendy Boston neighborhood. I bought a dining table large enough for chosen family. I started celebrating my birthday with people who didn't need me broken to feel secure. On the first anniversary of the party, Sarah brought a cake with no speech attached, no hidden cruelty, no performance disguised as love. Just my name, Ashley, written cleanly across the top. That night after everyone left, I sat alone for a while and thought about the woman who had walked out of that room at 30 years old, humiliated and stunned, and still not fully aware she was walking toward the rest of her life. I used to think revenge meant destroying the people who hurt you. Sometimes it does. But sometimes revenge is more exact than destruction. Sometimes it is forcing them to live in full view of what they chose, while you go on living in full possession of what they could not keep from you. Before I went to bed, I posted one final line to my private story, where only a small circle could see it. At 30, they tried to erase me in public, so they could keep what was mine in private. Instead, I took back my name, my future, and every lie they built on top of both. At Pro Revenge Stories, our team is committed to creating meaningful and engaging stories that leave a lasting impression on viewers. We want to make it clear that this is a fictional story, created for entertainment, while also sharing educational lessons and positive values with our audience. The female lead handled the situation with strength, patience, and self-respect, instead of letting humiliation destroy her. Her response shows that staying calm, seeking the truth, and protecting your dignity can be powerful than reacting in anger. If you were in her place, how would you have handled it, and what choice would you make?